morning. Thank you for that introduction. My name's Elisha. If you haven't heard of me or of Juniper, I'm a senior research analyst at Juniper Research, and we're an analyst house specialising in telecommunications. We also cover fintech, but obviously for today it's the telco market, specifically messaging, that we're going to discuss. If you were at this event last year, I also gave a presentation about SMS specifically. But today, I feel like the market shifted, and if you're going to mention SMS, I think it's relevant to mention other important channels such as RCS and OTT. So this presentation is titled The Messaging Mix, Navigating the Future of SMS, RCS and OTT. So some of you, if you know of Juniper, you may have seen this infographic on our socials or floating around before, but I like to present it today to kind of help contextualize where we're at currently. Obviously, the business messaging market continues to digitalize, and the infographic shows, God, I can't see it from there, I'll have to come over here. So SMS user base, so 9.3 billion mobile subscribers on SMS currently in 2024, with RCS having 1.2 billion active subscribers, that figure is, and then OTT showing 4.1 billion. So SMS is still showing, at the moment, to have the highest user base, but as we go through the presentation, obviously, as you've already heard this morning, the dynamic is starting to shift. So if we look at the RCS figures, so the 1.2 billion, so 60% of RCS, of subscribers are going to be RCS capable this year. That's almost 5 billion capable subscribers. And then of that, there's 25% that will be RCS active, so actively using the channel. So as I said, so SMS is the most popular channel for sending A2P messages, and that's due to obviously a number of factors, such as familiarity, ubiquity, and reliability. Reliability you can start to sometimes maybe take with a pinch of salt if you want to consider the fraud aspect, but in terms of message termination, SMS does have the reliability, and which is obviously very important when it comes to business critical messages. However, as I've mentioned, their dynamic is starting to change due to high international SMS rates in many markets, and we'll kind of go through that as the presentation goes on. So the launch of WhatsApp Business authentication use cases, which were priced last year, are a significant threat to the A2P SMS traffic, and we've already heard this morning that obviously P2P traffic, WhatsApp usage is on a massive increase. And then obviously this year in the EU, the DMA, so the Digital Markets Act, has been deployed to hopefully reduce the regional fragmentation of OTT messaging within the EU. And that was obviously a very big disadvantage of OTT prior to that regulation. And obviously, since this event last year, Apple has announced that it will start to support the RCS basic messages from autumn this year, I believe. And we think that will act as a stopgap for RBM, so rich business messaging. And as I said, the global RCS active subscribers, so they'll rise from 1.2 billion, which is shown in the infographic here, to 2.1 billion by 2025, so next year. So looking at data from 2020 to where we think it will be in 2028. So as you can see from the graphs, this is the global proportion of A2P messaging traffic attributable to each channel. So we've considered 3 channels here. So in 2022, SMS was at 95%. And then we anticipate that will drop down to approximately 65% by 2028. And that's due to a number of factors, such as obviously AIT fraud and also omnichannel. So we obviously heard a lot about omnichannel. We've heard about it for a couple of years. Businesses and consumers will start to become more comfortable with kind of talking to each other on anything other than maybe email, but in this case, SMS. And then looking at RCS messaging, so RCS business messaging. So obviously there was limited kind of support from operators, and obviously there wasn't any support from Apple up until this year. And then we can see from the graph from 2024, we anticipate an increase in RCS. So by 2028, 23% of A2P messaging traffic will be attributable to RCS. And obviously OTT business messaging, the growth there is of 10% by 2028. But I think as we've heard from this morning, there's more room for growth than that. So obviously obviously the data from MEF didn't come up till this morning, so you can always revisit and have a look at that growth as well. But there's still obviously massive growth for specifically WhatsApp within OTT. So as I just mentioned, so SMS, so in 2023, the AIT drives the increased price of SMS traffic. So obviously now businesses, messaging traffic is migrating to more affordable channels. SMS is starting to potentially be seen, instead of a first point of call for guaranteed termination, they might be now considered as kind of a last point of call because of the price. So with RCS, so in 2022 and before, there was limited support from operators and no movement from Apple. But obviously now, there's RCS support in every country, or almost every country, with 1.2 billion active RCS users. And then obviously, Apple has announced that it will support it from this year. And with OTT, in 2023, the migration of business messaging traffic follows the same pattern as P2P. And we've already seen this morning how big that pattern is and how much has migrated onto OTT apps, such as WhatsApp. And obviously, as I mentioned, the DMA has been deployed in the EU to reduce fragmentation problems. And there's a note here talking about APIs, but we'll talk about that a bit further in the presentation. So the use of APIs will allow operators to leverage their networks to capitalize on authentication revenue, despite the slowing growth of SMS. And we'll talk about that as we go through. So obviously, despite the problems of SMS in terms of pricing and fraud, there are benefits of SMS, and that's why it is still used as one of the most popular business messaging channels. And obviously the familiarity, reliability and ubiquity of SMS made it a reliable revenue stream for MNOs with its product, but now its product development is being considered more strategically. The use of A2P SMS will be particularly strong in geographies with low smartphone penetration rates, such as Africa and Middle East and Central and East Europe, which is to be expected. But with P2P SMS traffic declining, developing new use cases for SMS will be key. So the key use cases for SMS, so there's obviously one-time passwords, multi-factor authentication, notifications, and mission-critical information. However, these use cases are now obviously under threat. So as I've mentioned, SMS continues to face competition from other channels, and that can be used for authentication, including voice, push notifications, and silent authentication. And obviously on the right here, we can see the threats to the growth of SMS as a business messaging channel. So you've got SMS business messaging fraud, AIT, and obviously phishing that we've heard and we'll probably hear more about today. We've got flash calling. So obviously flash calling isn't as much of a threat now as it used to be because it's obviously being blocked, primarily being blocked to try and push traffic, authentication traffic back onto the SMS channel and potentially even RCS in the future. But it was a threat and should be considered here. APIs, so authentication APIs such as silent auth, OAuth, member verify, for example, are all threats to SMS messaging as an authentication channel. OTT apps, which we've already spoken about. And one kind of long-term threat that is, should be kind of noted is biometric passwordless kind of logons, for example. So there's more of a long-term threat, but there's no content there to be mimicked or corrupted. And as I mentioned, enterprise spend is driven by their return on investment, obviously. So therefore, SMS needs to be priced more competitively than what it is being at the moment and what we've seen it be over the last year or so. And if prices continue to rise, SMS may become more of a last resort channel for authentication use cases rather than it's what used to be the first choice. But despite that, obviously SMS does have benefits. So SMS won't disappear, well, we anticipate it won't disappear, obviously, as a business messaging channel. However, the growth will slow considerably and almost plateau. And an increased proportion of that traffic, as we saw from the graph on the previous slide, will migrate to other forms of messaging, such as RCS and OTT. So looking at how pricing can be reduced, obviously we've spoken about, well, I will speak about AIT. So despite the benefits of SMS, operators face increased pressures from initiatives such as like the GSMA Open Gateway, Kamara, and other APIs, flash calling for authentication, potentially, all causing a rise in SMS pricing, and that's what we've seen. And obviously this rise in pricing then made a kind of attractive value proposition for fraudsters, which led to kind of the increase in AIT. So it's kind of almost a vicious cycle where price increases and then causes fraud, which creates like a more attractive channel, and then price increases. So AIT fraud has resulted in some enterprises adopting new channels for authentication, and this will result in the growth of A2P SMS traffic slowing over the next 5 years, and that's what was presented on the slide earlier. But there has been obviously a number of conversations you've probably been involved in yourselves about how to reduce kind of AIT. And I've been to a number of kind of conferences and conversations have been had. And these are kind of the takeaways that I'm seeing from the conversations that are being had in the market currently. So obviously MNOs must maintain the competitive A2P messaging pricing for long-term sustainability of SMS. But how can that be done? So a couple of things that have been spoken about are price caps, obviously, to be introduced for SMS. Another one is changing the pricing, so instead of being volume-based, become more of kind of fair use price or subscription-based. That's something being had in conversations. But obviously market collaboration is required to reinstate the trust in SMS as a business messaging channel, despite the growth of rich messaging, despite the extra capabilities that rich messaging channels have. SMS still needs to have the trust within the channel, because obviously it is familiar to enterprises for their business messaging. And also collaboration with CPaaS providers to develop new pricing models, such as subscription-based, or fair use policies, like I mentioned earlier. Also in conversations that I've heard from kind of market leaders or people in the market, price transparency obviously is a massive key element here, and also introducing concepts such as whitelists. And this was something brought up in a carrier conference that I went to last month, and there's a quite in-depth conversation about whitelists. So I think that's being done in working groups, or you might be involved in it yourselves. And again, network APIs. So obviously because of the threats to SMS, operators still need to try and guarantee or ensure some authentication revenue, and they can do that through their authentication APIs instead. So moving on to RCS. So RCS has emerged as a channel for a number of rich business messaging use cases. And obviously the number of RCS-capable subscribers has increased over the last 2 years. And as I mentioned on the first slide, and you'll probably know, Apple has announced its support for RCS messaging in November 2023, and will implement this support on iOS devices in 2024. But in the meantime, operators have introduced billing models for RCS basic messages, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, which does have price parity with SMS. So there are rich features available, like brand verification, end-to-end encryption that RCS provides, at the same price of SMS. So that'll hopefully provide some sort of exposure to enterprises and consumers to also support the growth of RCS business messaging. So looking at the future of RCS business messaging, so looking at the active number of subscribers, so the 1.2 billion was on the first slide for 2024, and then for 2028, we anticipate that it will rise to about 2.9, just under 3 billion users. So through increased customer awareness, coupled with the rich capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, such as brand verification, end-to-end encryption, for example. This will mean that RCS will become one of the fastest growing business messaging channels over the next couple of years. However, we anticipate that the adoption of RCS for authentication use cases has been somewhat slow, and instead we anticipate that RCS business messaging will be first adopted for use cases for like promotional use cases, so the more retail and e-commerce, the more marketing side of things. So that still leaves a gap for SMS or for other authentication channels. But again, RCS can and probably will be in the future used as an authentication channel. But in the near future, we see it being used for more promotional messages due to kind of the rich capabilities that it holds. But obviously, I don't want to just sing its praises too hard. There will be some challenges. So these are the three main challenges that we are identifying. First one being the extent of Apple's support. So obviously, like I mentioned, Apple announced that they will support it from this year, but it's only the initial implementation will be for RCS, so P2P traffic only. And it is still ambiguous whether Apple will support RBM in the future. So we don't know how far that support from Apple will go yet. Obviously, fraud and regulations of messages. As RCS, you could consider it still as a relatively new channel from the perspective of enterprises and consumers. Ensuring that the channel stays clean is really important because you don't want it to have a negative connotation from the start. So regulations for RCS have already been a problem, and we saw that in India with the blocking of RCS in 2022. And we don't really want that pattern to be repeated as RCS becomes more important in other markets. So obviously regulation frameworks need to be stronger. If consumers receive high volumes of spam messages across RCS, then they are less likely to engage with those messages. And obviously, if they don't engage with the messages initially, then you can question how far RCS will go as a business messaging channel if it's not being trusted. RCS can obviously prevent a lot of types of fraud that occur with SMS, and I know MEF have a paper on that, so I'll shout out to MEF. If it's on their website, they provide a model if you want to have a look. So it can help with things like spoofing, phishing, through brand verification. But obviously things like consumer education here is very important. If a consumer is reliant on SMS or knows SMS well, and then they receive an RCS, they probably won't know it's RCS, they won't know it has brand verification. So having that consumer awareness, knowing that capabilities like that exist now, will hopefully help keep fraud low on the RCS channel. I say here that the onus is on operators, obviously, to keep consumers informed, but I think it's a market effort. I think it's a more collaborative effort between enterprises, operators, CPaaS platforms, example. And obviously pricing. I think we'll hear a lot about pricing today with business messaging, but there's currently no unified pricing model for RCS. So with different operators in some countries having different ways of pricing RCS. And maybe that isn't a bad thing, but you don't want it to go down the road of how SMS is currently, with it being priced extraordinarily high. Obviously, RCS basic messages, as I mentioned, had price parity with SMS. However, SMS pricing is currently problematic, as we've spoken about. So pricing will be a key factor there as well. So moving on to OTT business messaging. I hope you're all still with me. So in Juniper research, so the potential A2P operator revenue loss to OTT, so we anticipate that it will be around 380 million in this year, but will rise to about 906 million by 2028. However, when we've done our research and we've spoken to kind of CPaaS platforms and A2P platforms, one thing that was mentioned is it's dependent on how mature an enterprise is, or on whether they'll adopt OTT. So, for example, SMEs that operate nationally will be more likely to try using OTT messaging for A2P communication, because obviously in their markets, it's likely, well, we'll say WhatsApp in this case, in the UK is the largest OTT out there. But additionally, large enterprises such as Microsoft and Google agree A2P contract on a country level basis, and therefore the opportunity for OTT business messaging in those companies as well is also very high. But as consumers are required to download third-party apps for OTT, that's always going to be an element of friction and a barrier to adoption. But as we saw in the previous presentation, it seems that obviously the P2A or the P2P, P2A, WhatsApp is now scoring very highly on that. So hopefully that won't become a very big challenge because it's also well known now by end users. And also, if we're speaking about WhatsApp specifically, so there are a number of obviously OTT messaging apps, but WhatsApp is the most dominant one, as we've heard already today. And the app has particularly high penetration in markets such as Brazil, India, Mexico, Spain, and the UK. The list can go on, but those are the ones I've picked out. And that app the WhatsApp has released a number of commercial features over the last 12 months, with some including WhatsApp flows, the payment features have increased, and there was also Meta Verify, which was initially on Instagram and Messenger, I believe, but there's talk of that migrating to WhatsApp as well. So the app is constantly evolving, which I think is very beneficial to it. It's not remaining stagnant, so I think that's something I think channels like RCS can learn from as well. But obviously, also not going to sing WhatsApp's praises too high. So last year, when I was doing this presentation about SMS, I mentioned how WhatsApp released their new pricing business models, and you've obviously all heard of this already. So in 2022, they just had their user-initiated and business-initiated messaging pricing. And then last year, they released their 4 new use cases, so the utility, authentication being a big one to affect SMS, marketing, and then the service as well. So we anticipate that this will further increase the competition between OTT apps and SMS for business messaging, especially for authentication and OTP use cases. But from June this year, WhatsApp have recently announced that they are introducing international rates for authentication use cases. So this is WhatsApp data from the WhatsApp website. So the 2 markets that they have mentioned to have the rates first is Indonesia and India. So obviously the dark green shows the international rate, and then the light green shows a domestic rate. And you can see there, so in Indonesia, it's $0.136, they're meant to be, not pounds, my bad. And in India, it's 0.028, which is a massive increase from the other use cases that have been discussed currently, which you can see here. I'm not sure how clear it is. So this is also from WhatsApp's website. So I've just taken the regions that they split it out by. So you've got North America, Latin America, West Europe, Central and East Europe, Asia Pacific, and Africa and the Middle East, and split it by their 4 current use cases that they advertise. But then at the top, you've got the Indonesia and India figures, just to show and highlight how much more expensive the new international authentication rates are compared to the current pricing. So that is also a potential worry to the future of WhatsApp in this case. But we'll see what implications those have, obviously, once the pricing's been introduced this year. And obviously it is only in Indonesia and India currently. So to kind of wrap up, I don't want to go over time. So first point of this presentation, obviously SMS pricing will continue to impact the demand for SMS. I don't know how many times I've said that in this presentation, so I'll kind of leave that one there. And I haven't spoken about AI very much, and that's obviously because you'll hear about it later today, I believe. There's some presentation on it this afternoon. And I imagine you all speak about it in your everyday life. So the growing revenue potential from SMS will result in an increase in the number of fraudsters obviously trying to profit from the channel, especially from things like AIT. And with these technological advancements, AI and machine learning will hopefully be a great technology to detect and hopefully eliminate some fraud across the SMS channel. Apple's support for RCS will obviously increase the value proposition. With Apple's support, there's obviously now iOS users, or there will be iOS users having RCS available to them, hopefully increasing the kind of P2P usage of RCS and then feeding through, hopefully then into the A2P usage of RCS. And also, as brands can be verified, this enables consumers to have a greater trust in RCS as a messaging channel. Obviously, as I mentioned previously, I think consumer awareness is, or consumer education is a big factor to play here. And I have mentioned it, but obviously, I say authentication APIs, but communication APIs will provide an alternative to SMS for operators. It will hopefully keep demand for SMS use cases, obviously such as authentication, on their networks. So I guess there's not much they can do about SMS, well they can, about SMS and its pricing, but to try and maintain some revenue that is being lost to SMS, APIs will be hopefully a good avenue for operators as well. So yes, if you have any questions, I guess now is your chance. Oh, good. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anthony Hornung from Clavier. I had a quick question. In all your stats and kind of like looking into the future, are you assuming that Apple will not support A2P messaging for RCS? Or like, have you ignored that, or was that taken into account?
Yeah, obviously it's considered. You can't guarantee when. We think they will, but it's not necessarily knowing. It's knowing when rather than if. So in the 2028 data, not yet. We haven't obviously ignored it, but we don't think that will include Apple supporting the business messaging up until 2028. But up until, obviously, they'll be revised if and when.
Okay, is that why it was... Hello? Is that why it was 2 billion next year for RCS, but if Apple support rich business messaging, will it be a lot higher than 2?
Yeah, we anticipate so.
2 billion, okay.
Yeah, we'll obviously see if they announce it in any specific markets as well, unless it's just a global kind of update. But when that happens, we'll obviously revise the data and probably present it at some point.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Maybe hold that question for this afternoon as well, because Google will be presenting RCS later. I'm sure there'll be lots of other people.
Nick, we have one more question. Gene,
stage. Yep. Eugene?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Elisha. Gene Pradas from BTS. I was trying to follow the rationale on the pricing area, okay? You had one slide that shows how to possibly lower the pricing, all right? But the rest of the presentation, it feels like the pricing are going up, even though what's up is going on, the business model. How to reduce the pricing, it's still going up. So even though you indicated that there's a way of bringing it down, no one's following it.
No.
Okay.
No. And those recommendations that I gave were from conversations that I've seen in kind of experiences like this. They've been with market leaders, people in the market themselves. That's what they're talking about. Obviously, we can't do anything to reduce the pricing. I think they're looking at potentially trying to reduce the fraud aspect of it as well with the whitelists. But yeah, like I say, we can't control the price of SMS. I can't control the price of SMS. So in terms of those recommendations, they probably weren't recommendations. They're probably more what I've seen or what's been spoken about from my experience in the market.
Okay.
Hi, James from GTC. It's great to see RCS on the rise. Can you talk about the statistics around how much of that RCS growth is going to come from A2P in terms of percentage or dollar value?
Yeah, we do have, I can't remember off the top of my head, but we can have that conversation. I don't have it to hand, but we do have the data for that, so we can chat about that.
I think you'll hear more about that later on today as well. So I'm constantly teasing you to stay here for the whole day. So 2 things. One is thank you very much, Elisha. That was fantastic.